Fall asleep to the Odyssey, a calm sleep story retelling of the Greek mythology classic. Soothing bedtime listening for deep relaxation, stress relief, and restful nights. By Wren and Sable Classics. Introduction. There is something about the rhythm of the sea that pulls us toward rest. For thousands of years, people have told the story of Odysseus. It is the original road trip, a long, winding path through a world of ancient gods and strange islands, all leading toward the warmth of a hearth and the face of a loved one. But tonight, we are not here for the adrenaline. We are not here for the danger or the sharp edges of an epic battle. We are here for the journey itself, and for the peace that comes with knowing the way home. This version of the Odyssey has been crafted specifically for your quietest hours. We have taken these legendary adventures and softened them, turning the high seas into a slow, steady pulse. The prose is unhurried. It moves with the deep, rhythmic breath of the ocean. There are 12 chapters ahead of you, each one a calm stepping stone across the water. The beauty of a story this old is that it is already part of us. You don't need to worry about missing a plot point or keeping track of every name. This is a safe space to drift. If your mind begins to wander or your eyes grow heavy mid-voyage, let them. You can fall asleep in the middle of a chapter and wake up on a completely different shore tomorrow night. There is no right way to listen, and there is no rush to reach Ithaca. The sea is patient, and the story will always be here when you return. So let the world outside your room begin to fade. Let the tension in your shoulders dissolve into the salt air. We are going to leave the modern world behind and travel back to a time when the stars were the only map. We begin our journey on Ogygia, the island of the nymph Calypso. It is a place of absolute stillness, far from the noise of the world. The air here smells of cedarwood and blooming violets. The waves touch the sand with a sound like a soft whisper. We are dimming the lights on the island now. The sun is dipping below the horizon, and the water is turning a deep, restful blue. Close your eyes. The voyage has begun, and you are safe at sea. The island of Calypso. Far out in the reaches of the great encircling sea, there rests the island of Ogygia, a place tucked away from the map of the world, where time moves with the slow, deliberate pulse of a sleeping giant's breath. It is a land of eternal afternoon, where the light of the sun does not burn, but rather bathes the earth in a soft amber glow, casting long and gentle shadows across the meadows of wild parsley and the thick carpets of deep purple violets. Here, the air is never still, but never hurried, carrying with it the perpetual scent of burning cedar and sandalwood that drifts from the hearth of the great grotto where the goddess Calypso makes her home. To arrive on these shores is to feel the weight of the world's noise begin to dissolve, replaced by the rhythmic, low-frequency hum of the ocean as it meets the fine, white sands in a sequence of endless, shimmering waves. In the center of this island, there lives the hero Odysseus, though here his name is spoken only by the wind and the soft voice of the goddess. For the clamor of the Trojan plains and the shouts of his rowing men have long since faded into the softest of echoes. He spends his days not in the frantic struggle of the journey, but in a state of quiet suspension, a long and unhurried pause between the chapters of a life that once moved too quickly. As the sun begins its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in washes of lavender, peach, and bruised plum, Odysseus often finds himself sitting upon a smooth, sun-warmed rock at the very edge of the island, his gaze fixed upon the distant line where the blue of the water meets the blue of the heavens. His longing for his home in Ithaca is not a sharp or jagged pain, but rather a soft, rhythmic ache, much like the tide that pulls gently at his feet before receding back into the depths. It is a quiet melody that hums in the back of his mind, a memory of olive trees and stone hearths that feels as distant and beautiful as a dream remembered upon waking. He watches the foam of the sea as it curls and uncurls, tracing patterns in the sand that are erased and rewritten with every breath of the tide, and he finds a strange comfort in the repetition, in the knowledge that some things in this world are constant and require nothing from him but his presence. Behind him, the island is a lush and layered sanctuary, a garden that seems to have been grown from the very substance of peace itself. Great trees rise toward the sky, their branches heavy with the weight of sleep. Alder and poplar and the fragrant cypress, where wide-winged birds make their nests and settle for the evening with soft, rustling sighs. There are owls with eyes like golden coins who watch the transition from day to night with a blinking ancient wisdom, and long-tongued sea crows who have folded their wings against the cooling air. The forest is a tapestry of greens and silvers, illuminated by the last rays of the sun, filtering through the leaves like honey through a sieve, creating pools of warmth upon the moss-covered ground, where small, nameless flowers tilt their heads toward the coming stars. From the heart of the island, the sound of a loom can be heard, a rhythmic and soothing click-clack that marks the passage of the hours. Inside her spacious grotto, the goddess Calypso moves with a grace that is as fluid as the water that flows from the 4 springs nearby. She is weaving a great web of cloth, her golden shuttle flying back and forth through the threads of silver and seafoam green, and as she works, she sings. Her voice is a low, melodious vibration that seems to come from the earth itself, a song without words that tells of the deep places of the ocean and the slow turning of the constellations. The fire on her hearth burns with a steady, smokeless flame, casting a warm light over the clusters of grapes that hang heavy and ripe from the vines trailing across the mouth of the cave, their skins dusted with a fine, misty bloom. The water of the 4 springs runs in clear, winding ribbons through the meadows, and as the evening deepens, the sound of their trickling becomes the dominant note in the island's symphony. They flow in different directions, crossing and recrossing the landscape in a pattern that is both intricate and effortless, nourishing the roots of the wild celery and the soft, yielding grass. Odysseus listens to the water, and he feels his own thoughts begin to flow with it, moving away from the complexities of the past and the uncertainties of the future, settling instead into the simple, cool reality of the present moment. The island does not ask him to be a king or a warrior. It asks him only to breathe, to observe the way the light catches on the surface of a stream, and to feel the cooling air as it brushes against his skin. As the last sliver of the sun disappears beneath the waves, the world of Ogygia undergoes a subtle transformation. The amber light fades into a deep, velvety indigo, and the stars begin to emerge, one by one like tiny lanterns hung in the rafters of a great hall. The sea, which was once a bright and sparkling turquoise, now becomes a vast expanse of polished obsidian, reflecting the silver light of the moon as it rises in a slow, stately arc. The waves continue their work, whispering secrets to the shore in a language of soft hushing sounds and liquid sighs, a lullaby that has been sung since the beginning of time and will continue long after the last fire has gone out. Odysseus rises from his seat by the shore, his movements slow and deliberate, his body feeling heavy and relaxed, as if the very gravity of the island has increased to hold him in a gentle embrace. He walks back toward the grotto, his feet sinking slightly into the cool, damp sand, the scent of the evening air filling his lungs with the fragrance of sea salt and blooming jasmine. He passes through the meadows where the violets have tucked their petals away for the night, and the grass is silvered with a fine coating of dew that sparkles in the moonlight like a field of fallen stars. Everything here is soft. There are no sharp edges, no sudden noises, only the immense and comforting silence of a world that is completely at rest. Within the grotto, the fire has settled into a bed of glowing coals, radiating a steady and gentle warmth that fills the space. Calypso has set aside her golden shuttle, and the great web of her weaving hangs still upon the loom, a shimmering testament to the slow beauty of the day's labor. She moves through the shadows with a quiet presence, her movements as silent as the owls in the trees outside, and the atmosphere of the cave is one of profound safety and seclusion. The walls of the grotto are smooth and cool, draped with the living green of the vines, and the air is thick with the sweet, heavy scent of the ripening grapes and the lingering perfume of the cedarwood. Odysseus finds his place of rest, a bed of soft furs and fine linens that seems to mold itself to the contours of his body, supporting him in a way that makes the very idea of effort seem like a distant memory. He lies back and listens to the sounds of the night, the distant murmur of the 4 springs, the rhythmic pulse of the ocean, and the soft occasional rustle of a bird shifting in its sleep. He feels the boundaries of his own mind beginning to soften and blur, the images of his long journey dissolving into the dark, quiet waters of the present. The island of Ogygia is a cradle, and he is a child held within it, safe from the storms and the trials of the world beyond the horizon. The moon climbs higher, casting its cool radiance over the entire island, turning the forest into a cathedral of silver light and deep, restful shadow. The stars wheel slowly overhead, their ancient patterns a silent clock that marks the passage of a night that feels as though it could last for 1,000 years. There is no hurry here. There is no destination to reach, no task to complete. There is only the breath, the light, and the sound of the sea. As the deep stillness of the middle night settles over the grotto, Odysseus feels a profound sense of peace settle over him, a weightless sensation that carries him away from the shores of thought. The shadows on the wall flicker in the dying light of the coals, dancing in a slow and graceful rhythm that mirrors the beating of his own heart. The world outside the cave continues its quiet existence, the waves coming in and going out, the springs flowing over the stones, the wind moving through the cypress branches. But here, in the heart of the island, everything has come to a point of perfect stasis. The goddess Calypso, too, has found her rest, her presence a calming influence that permeates the very stone of the island. In this place, even the gods seem to move with a slower grace, their immortality not a burden of endless time, but a gift of endless quiet. The island is a sanctuary for all who find themselves upon its shores, a place where the soul can rest and the mind can drift like a piece of polished driftwood on a calm and sunlit sea. In the final hours before the first hint of dawn, the island is at its most silent. The birds are deep in their dreams, the springs move with a muted silver sound, and even the ocean seems to lower its voice to a whisper. Odysseus is no longer a traveler, no longer a hero, no longer a man lost at sea. He is simply a part of the island, a single note in the great slow song of Ogygia. His breath is synchronized with the pulse of the tide, and as the stars begin to pale in the approaching light of a new unhurried day, he remains held in the soft, enduring embrace of the island, where the only thing that matters is the gentleness of the moment and the infinite, soothing peace of the great wine-dark sea, the raft and the kind waves. On the island of Ogygia, where the air always smelled of cedar smoke and pressed grapes, the time of waiting began to fold into the time of departure, as softly as a closing petal. The goddess Calypso, her hair the color of burnished honey, moved through her gardens with a quiet grace, her footsteps leaving no mark upon the moss that cushioned the earth. She had heard the whisper of the wind, a message carried from the high peaks of Olympus, suggesting that the wanderer's stay in her hidden paradise was drawing to a natural, gentle close. There was no sharpness in this realization, only a slow turning of the season, a recognition that the tide which had brought the traveler to her shores was now preparing to carry him home. Odysseus sat upon the rocky headland, his gaze fixed upon the horizon, where the blue of the sea met the pale lavender of the sky, and he felt a deep, resonant stillness settle within his chest. The longing for his own hearth was not a piercing ache, but a steady, warm hum, like the sound of bees in a summer meadow. When the goddess approached him, her voice was like the rustle of silk against stone, informing him that the trees of the forest were ready to lend their strength to his journey. She led him to a grove where the tall poplars and alders reached toward the clouds, their leaves shimmering with a silver light that seemed to hold the reflection of the moon, even in the bright afternoon. The work of building his vessel began not with a flurry of motion, but with a deliberate, rhythmic cadence. He chose the wood with care, feeling the weight of the axe in his hand as it moved through the air in a slow, steady arc. Each stroke against the timber produced a sound that was deep and hollow, a heartbeat echoing through the quiet woods. He felled 20 trees in all, their trunks sliding to the earth with a soft, muffled thud, settling into the ferns as if they were merely lying down to rest. With a bronze adze, he smoothed the surfaces of the beams, his hands following the natural grain of the wood until the planks felt as soft as polished bone under his palms. He bored holes through the timber with a slow, rotating motion, the shavings of cedar curling away like ribbons of gold. He joined the pieces together with wooden pegs and sturdy joints, fitting them with such precision that the raft became a single, breathing entity. He built a deck of woven willow branches to serve as a bulwark against the spray, and he stepped a mast of tough fir, lashing it with stays of oxhide that had been cured until they were as supple as silk. The goddess brought him cloth for the sail, a fabric so fine and light it seemed to have been woven from the morning mist, and he bound it to the yardarm with knots that were firm yet graceful. By the fourth day, the raft was complete, a sturdy sanctuary of pale wood, resting on the edge of the lapping waves, smelling of sap and salt, and the promise of the open road. On the fifth morning, the departure was as quiet as the dawn itself. Calypso provided him with skins of dark, fragrant wine and clear spring water, along with a tunic that felt like a warm embrace against his skin. She breathed a gentle wind into the sails, a breeze that tasted of wildflowers and distant hills, and the raft began to glide away from the shore. The island of Ogygia grew smaller, dissolving into a shimmering emerald haze, until it was nothing more than a memory, resting on the surface of the water. Odysseus sat at the helm, his hand resting lightly on the steering oar, feeling the pulse of the ocean beneath him. The sea was a vast, undulating blanket of sapphire, its movements slow and ponderous, rocking the small craft with the steady rhythm of a cradle. For 17 days, the journey was a meditation of light and shadow. The sun would rise in a slow bloom of apricot and gold, warming the wood of the raft and turning the spray into a dusting of diamonds. In the heat of the noon, the world became a study in blue, a boundless expanse where the only sound was the soft hiss of the water parting before the prow. As evening approached, the sky would deepen into bruised violets and deep indigos, and the first stars would begin to blink awake. Odysseus watched the constellations with a calm, unhurried gaze, tracing the path of the Pleiades and the late-setting Boetes. He kept the Great Bear on his left, as the goddess had instructed, using the celestial map as a silent guide through the velvet darkness. The nights were cool and vast, the stars reflecting in the still water so that it felt as though he were sailing through the heavens themselves, suspended between two infinities of light. On the 18th day, the horizon began to change, the silhouette of the Phaeacian mountains appearing like a dark, sleeping shadow against the sky. But Poseidon, returning from the distant lands of the sun, looked down upon the lonely voyager and stirred the waters with a slow, heavy hand. The clouds gathered, not in a sudden burst, but in a gradual thickening of the air, as if a heavy curtain were being drawn across the world. The wind began to sigh, a deep, resonant sound that carried the weight of the deep trenches of the sea. The waves rose higher, their crests turning to a soft, frothy white, moving toward the raft with a slow and rhythmic majesty. There was no violence in their approach, only a profound elemental power that sought to return the wooden planks to the sea from which they came. The raft was lifted high on the shoulders of a great swell, and for a moment Odysseus felt as though he were touching the very underside of the clouds. Then, with a long, slow slide, the vessel descended into the trough of the wave, the water rising up around him like walls of translucent jade. A great wave, heavy and warm, broke over the deck, and the steering oar was swept away as if it were a mere twig. The mast snapped with a sound like a distant branch breaking in a winter forest, and the sail fluttered down to the water, settling like a fallen leaf. Odysseus was cast into the sea, the water closing over him with a cool, quiet pressure. It was not a struggle, but a slow immersion into a different world, a place of muted light and profound silence. As he rose back to the surface, gasping softly, he saw a shimmer in the water nearby, a pale, luminous glow that moved with the grace of a ribbon in the wind. Ino, the goddess of the slender ankles, emerged from the waves, her form made of light and sea foam. She spoke to him in a voice that was like the chime of a bell underwater, telling him to cast off his heavy garments and trust in the sea. She gave him a veil, a fabric so thin it was nearly invisible, shimmering with a soft pearlescent radiance. He wrapped it around his chest, and as he did, he felt a sense of weightlessness wash over him. The cold of the water faded, replaced by a gentle humming warmth that seemed to radiate from the veil itself. He let go of the remnants of his raft, watching as the timbers drifted apart, returning to the vastness of the ocean. And he began to swim with a slow, rhythmic stroke. For 2 days and 2 nights, he floated on the breast of the sea, the veil of Eno supporting him like a soft, invisible hand. The waves had become quiet again, their movements reduced to a gentle, rocking swell that lulled his mind into a state of deep, dreamlike peace. He was no longer a man fighting the elements, but a part of the water itself, rising and falling with its breath. The spray on his face was a cool mist, and the sound of the ocean was a low, constant murmur that drowned out all other thoughts. He saw the world from the level of the waves, watching the play of light on the surface, the way the bubbles of foam formed intricate, fleeting patterns before dissolving back into the blue. On the third morning, the wind died down to a whisper, and the sea became as smooth as a sheet of silver glass. The Phaeacian coast was near now, a line of dark cliffs and green forests rising out of the mist. He found a river mouth, where the fresh water flowed into the sea with a quiet, steady current, the banks lined with smooth stones and soft, overhanging trees. He swam into the shelter of the river, the water turning from salt to sweet, and he felt the solid earth beneath his feet once more. He walked onto the shore, his legs heavy and slow, as if he were relearning how to move on land. He unbound the veil of Eno, and without looking back, cast it into the receding tide, where it was caught by a wave and carried back to the deep. A short distance from the river's edge, he found a thicket where 2 olive trees grew together, one wild and one cultivated, their branches intertwined so closely that neither the wind nor the rain could penetrate their canopy. The ground beneath them was deep with fallen leaves, a bed of dry, golden parchment that smelled of earth and sun. Odysseus crept into the center of the thicket and began to gather the leaves over him, burying himself in their warmth until he was completely hidden from the world. He felt the heat of the day trapped within the pile of leaves, a soft, insulating blanket that pressed gently against his tired limbs. The world outside the thicket faded away, the sound of the river, the rustle of the olive leaves, the distant call of a seabird, all of it merging into a single, quiet vibration. He closed his eyes, and as the darkness of sleep began to rise to meet him, he felt a profound sense of safety, as if he were a spark of fire buried deep within the hearth, waiting for the morning to come. The long journey was over for now, and the earth was holding him close, whispering of rest and the quiet, steady passage of time. The land of the Phaeacians. The salt, heavy waves had finally grown weary, smoothing themselves into long, rhythmic pulses that carried the traveler toward the edge of the world, where the land of the Phaeacians rose like a soft green sigh from the breast of the wine-dark sea. Here, the water did not crash against the shore, but gathered itself in quiet silver pools among the smooth pebbles, whispering secrets to the reeds that swayed in the salt-tinged breeze. Odysseus, his limbs heavy with the weight of the deep ocean, and his mind drifting in the twilight between the waking world and the realm of dreams, found himself lifted by the tide and laid gently upon the shelving sand, as if the sea itself were a nurse, tucking a tired child into a bed of soft silt and scattered shells. He crept into the shelter of 2 olive trees, one wild, one grafted and sweet, whose branches entwined so closely that neither the piercing rays of the sun nor the damp breath of the north wind could penetrate their silver-green canopy. Beneath this ancient roof, he gathered a thick mattress of fallen leaves, pulling them over his body like a heavy golden quilt. And there he fell into a sleep so profound and so still that it seemed the very earth had risen up to cradle him in its silent, patient arms. While he slept, the dawn arrived not with a shout, but with a gradual unfolding of rose and pale amber light that touched the peaks of the Phaeacian hills and spilled down into the valley where the river met the sea. Princess Nausicaa, her eyes bright with the clarity of a long night's rest, moved through the quiet corridors of her father's palace with feet that made no sound upon the polished stone. The air was cool and smelled of mountain thyme and the distant briny promise of the morning. With her handmaidens beside her, she guided a wagon laden with fine linens and robes toward the river, the wooden wheels making a low, rhythmic rumble that harmonized with the waking songs of the birds in the pomegranate groves. They reached the place where the river widened into clear, swirling eddies, and there they began their work, not as a chore, but as a slow and graceful dance. They stepped into the water, feeling the cool current wrap around their ankles like silk, and they rinsed the fabrics until the colors, deep purples, sea greens, and creams, shone with a renewed luster under the brightening sun. When the work was finished, and the linens were spread out to dry upon the sun-warmed stones of the bank, the air grew still and warm, filled with the hum of golden bees and the occasional soft splash of a jumping fish. The maidens bathed themselves in the crystal pools, their laughter sounding like distant bells across the meadow, and they began a game of ball, tossing the sphere back and forth in arcs that traced the path of the sun, falling into a deep pool with a sudden soft chime of water that finally drew Odysseus from his leafy sanctuary. He emerged from the shadows of the olive trees, not as a warrior, but as a man who had been weathered by the elements into something elemental himself, his skin crusted with salt, and his eyes reflecting the vast, quiet distances of the sea. Seeing him, the maidens scattered like birds, but Nausicaa stood her ground, her heart as steady as the ancient mountains of her home, for she saw in the stranger not a threat, but a soul in need of the quiet grace that her people held most dear. With a voice that was like the sound of a lute played in a distant room, she spoke to him of kindness and the sacred laws of the guest, offering him the oil of the olive to cleanse his skin, and fine garments of wool to replace the rags of his journey. Odysseus withdrew to a private bend in the river, where the water was deep and green, and there he washed away the brine and the weariness of the many-voiced sea. When he emerged, clothed in the fresh, fragrant robes the princess had provided, he seemed transformed, his stature restored by the simple magic of care and the promise of a hearth. The walk toward the city was an unhurried procession through a landscape that seemed to exist in a state of eternal summer. They passed through orchards where the heavy boughs of pear trees and apple trees hung low with fruit that never failed, where one harvest ripened even as the next began to blossom, creating a continuous cycle of abundance that scented the air with sweetness and peace. The palace of King Alcinous rose before them like a vision woven from the light of the moon. Its walls were made of burnished bronze that glowed with a soft inner warmth, and the doors were of solid gold, guarded by silver hounds that stood in silent eternal vigil. Inside, the atmosphere was one of profound and settled calm. Great tapestries hung from the walls, depicting the quiet histories of a people who loved the sea, but cherished the stability of the shore. Queen Arete sat near the hearth, her spindle turning with a rhythmic whir as she spun wool of a deep, royal purple, the firelight catching the silver threads in her hair, and the steady, wise expression in her eyes. There was no clamor here, no shouting or the clatter of weapons. There was only the low murmur of conversation and the soft clink of silver cups being filled with honeyed wine. Odysseus was led to a seat of honor, a chair carved from cedar and cushioned with the softest fleeces of the mountain sheep. A golden ewer was brought, and cool water was poured over his hands into a silver basin, a ritual of welcome that felt like a blessing. Then came the food, bread that was warm from the oven and smelled of the sun-parched fields, roasted meats seasoned with bay and wild marjoram, and clusters of grapes that burst with the concentrated sweetness of the long afternoons. He ate slowly, savoring each flavor as if he were tasting the earth for the first time, after a lifetime upon the barren waves. The king and queen watched him with a gentle, patient curiosity, asking nothing of him until he had been fully restored by their hospitality, understanding that a man's story is a heavy thing that should only be shared when he is ready to unburden his heart. As the evening deepened and the stars began to appear in the velvet sky above the palace courtyard, a bath was prepared for the guest. The room was filled with the soft rising steam of water heated over a slow fire, and the air was thick with the scent of rose oil and cedarwood. Odysseus stepped into the great polished tub, feeling the heat seep into his tired muscles, dissolving the last remnants of the cold Atlantic depths. The water was a pale, shimmering silk, and as he soaked, the tension that had held his shoulders tight for 10 long years began to melt away, leaving him light and drifting, as if he were floating upon a cloud rather than a vessel of stone.